to say that hormones don't impact energy intake is kind of a stretch. And then also to say hormones don't impact energy output. Well, if you feel like garbage, you got low testosterone, low thyroid, like tell me you're going to go have your best training session of your life when you feel like trash. It's not going to happen. Welcome to Sammillerscience, where you're joining me nearly 2 decades into my personal journey to bridge the gap between macros, metabolism, muscle, and medicine. If you're joining me, thanks for trusting me to elevate your health and realize your true potential. Each week and inside every episode, I'll be sharing methods and models from my coaching journey and my personal experience, as well as the science that you need to achieve whatever specific goals you're working on in your life. Let's jump in to today's show. Welcome back. Inside today's show, we have a special featured interview for you. Over the past 7 to 10 years, I've had the amazing opportunity to collaborate with so many wonderful creators in the health and fitness space. And anytime we're talking about nutrition, metabolism, hormones, gut health, anti-aging, performance, really any topic that would be pertinent for you guys to listen to here in the Sam Miller Science feed, my team and I will take these episodes and we'll either play the full Q&A interview, mashups, or take some of the best monologue style content and bring it to you here in the feed. These topics are meant to showcase past interviews and things that I think are either important, trending, or relevant for your understanding, either in your own health and fitness journey or as a health and fitness coach. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Without further ado, let's jump into this featured replay. People talk about the word metabolism, and for even the athlete or health enthusiast, it's a word that's kind of getting thrown around a little bit more in our industry, I would say, as things like hormones and longevity, gut health, all of these topics have become much more mainstream, I guess you could say. You know, these used to be topics that you kind of had to be very, very much within a niche to kind of understand these things. But now, you know, even the average gym goer is starting to care about their hormones, their gut health, their performance, their longevity. And so metabolism is really kind of the intersection point of those things. It's just a way to describe the processes that go on in our body every single day. So when I think of someone's metabolic health, we're really talking about quality of life, performance, longevity, you know, so many things that impact not only our present health, but our long-term risk factors. And so a lot of my work is really focused on the conversation around metabolic health and how nutrition, training, lifestyle, and even some of the stuff that comes in like, you know, telemedicine and biohacking, those things also play a role in our metabolic health. And that's one of the reasons we've seen kind of the popularization of the term metabolism and things like hormones as well. So something I've been focused on for a long time. I've been in the industry for close to 18 years now, and definitely became a topic of interest for me, not only in terms of my own health, but my family, and just honestly, I had a lot of clients, you know, who were struggling with their health as well. And it was something that allowed me to provide more value when I was working with them in that setting. Even to say calories in, calories out, we have to understand that we're talking about is energy, right? Calorie consumption is the intake of energy, and calories out means energy expenditure, or what a lot of people in the bro science world refer to as, well, and also in exercise physiology and nutrition textbooks, TDEE, or total daily energy expenditure. Now, energy in is impacted by a number of things. One of the main things that people struggle with when they have poor metabolic health is hunger regulation and blood sugar regulation. And so hormones like leptin and ghrelin and GLP-1 help to regulate that appetite signaling. And we have these mechanisms known as the hedonic and homeostatic eating systems, just a big fancy way of saying our body's natural mechanisms for regulating hunger and cravings. And so to say that hormones don't impact energy intake is kind of a stretch. And then also to say hormones don't impact energy output. Well, if you feel like garbage, you got low testosterone, low thyroid, like tell me you're going to go have your best training session of your life when you feel like trash. It's not going to happen. And then also when it comes to energy expenditure, things like non-exercise activity from steps, walking, being active with your kids, if you don't have optimal health and you're not supporting that through the nourishment aspect of nutrition, very, very hard to perform your best and feel your best. So I fall in the camp of, yes, energy matters and we need to account for energy intake and energy expenditure, but the food quality conversation, the micronutrient conversation, the lifestyle optimization conversation, that plays a role in our hormonal health and our gut health, which impacts how we feel, and how we feel may impact our daily decision-making in terms of our diet and our exercise and our performance. So I view them as inseparable entities. I do think some people overvalue the thermodynamic side a little bit, the macros and calories. I think those are a tool and unit of measurement to help people achieve portion control and not overeat. I think if you've never tracked your food before, keeping a food log or a dietary journal can be super helpful, mainly for awareness purposes, right? We have to start somewhere. So I'm not against those things. I just think they're tools for a season. And like for many competitors or athletes, a lot of them actually undereat. So creating that food log or journal may actually encourage them to support adequate nutrition. For the chronic dieter, maybe it's realizing like, hey, we haven't been eating enough for many, many seasons now as you've tried to lose body fat. And maybe we need a different season of nutrition, something like a reverse diet or maintenance phase of some kind, or maybe we need to scale down the training a little bit. So I think there's certain aspects where education around hormones, gut health, physiology, biochemistry can support our understanding of some of these kind of mainstream concepts. But a lot of the internet arguments, I think it just strikes me as people doing it for attention and to have polarity, on the concept. But I think macros and calories are a tool, but to neglect hormonal health, to neglect gut health, things like insulin sensitivity, we know that's important not only for long-term risk, but even, and not just your lifespan either. It's also your health span, your quality of life, your cognitive function. I think the best thing we can do is sort of take the best science from each of those camps and also see what works in practice. And I know I've seen enough athletes and enough clients who try to play macro Tetris and just hit calories and they still feel like trash. And I also know people who quote unquote eat healthy or do the Whole30 and shop at Whole Foods, but they don't have the body that they want. We really need to take, those factors into account and have a little bit more of a nuanced conversation. That's a lot of what my work has been in the industry, is combining those conversations in a way that people can actually understand, and rather than fear mongering or overwhelming people, really trying to break that down in a digestible way. Energy consumption in and of itself, caloric excess, right, can drive things like insulin resistance. On the other side though, if we're eating single ingredient, minimally processed foods and eating whole foods, lean proteins, high quality carbohydrates and dietary fats, good omega-3 to omega-6 ratio, we see in practice, and anyone who's coached a real human being knows that impacts your hunger and satiety, that impacts your decision making and your cravings, how you feel after each meal. And if you do it long enough and you stick with it, we see health improvements. And now what really helps drive this home is when you're also using tools like lab work, blood testing, because you can see it, but not just on the outside in the progress photos, but you see the inside transformation as well. And that's why I really try to use both, not only for clients, but even in terms of the health professionals that we work with and teach, is because that gives you a full kind of 360-degree view of what a person's experiencing. So usually when you go to the doctor and you go to a primary care physician or just for a general physical, just to clarify the difference between going and doing your labs yourself versus maybe going to normal doctor's office. Usually you get a CBC and a CMP. This is a complete blood count and a very basic metabolic panel. Just has some basic indicators of organ function, electrolyte status, things of that nature. Sometimes you'll get your lipids, which is a very kind of rudimentary view of cholesterol. Really, they're lipoproteins. It's not even like very hyper-specific to it's not as specific as we can get with cardiovascular disease. And you're really missing a lot in terms of hormones. Like you really have to kind of beg and plead to get things like testosterone and thyroid and insulin and stuff like that. If you're looking on your own, we're going to start with those basics, but we're going to add some really specific markers to create the most value and give you the best insights and picture when it comes to your health. So on top of that CBC and CMP and the basic tests that your doctor's going to include, which will give you like a fasted glucose and some general information about your blood cells, we also want to look at a complete picture of your thyroid health, which is going to include TSH, free T3, free T4. Women may, depending on if they have a history of autoimmune disease in their families, or if any sisters or aunts or mothers, grandmothers have autoimmune history, they may want to look at Hashimoto's risk factors, especially if they train very intensely and diet very intensely. Reproductive hormones for men and women, we always want to look at testosterone, free testosterone. Progesterone for women is a very important indication of menstrual cycle health. And anyone who's premenopausal as a female should be looking for those progesterone and estradiol levels. And then if you are someone who's maybe in more of that perimenopausal setting, you want to look at estradiol, progesterone, and free testosterone as well, just through a slightly different lens because we're in a different season of life. Metabolic health markers, I love fasting insulin. Great to see your insulin sensitivity and how you're responding to your dietary patterns or nutritional patterns. And then there's a marker called C-reactive protein that's a great marker of inflammation in the body. And so it's the kind you want is a highly sensitive C-reactive protein. And I tend to look at more specific insights based on family history. So if I'm working with a client or maybe for myself, like I mentioned, my dad's history of having a 98% blockage, I'm going to zoom in on some of the cardiovascular risk parameters. So some really great markers there. There's one called LPA. So like Lisa, Paul, and then Adam, and then APOB. So these are more specific measurements of cardiovascular risk. So depending on your family history, you might want to do that. But just some mainstays for everybody, like fasting insulin's great, CRP's great, thyroid health's great, reproductive hormones, very, very important. If I had to add some other ones in there, looking at something like your vitamin D status. So your hydroxy vitamin D, very, very important. Most people are not going to get enough from their diet. And depending on geographically where you live, in terms of your sun exposure, also ethnicity can play a role in deficiency there. And for athletes, maybe adding some things like RBC magnesium to look at magnesium status, that could be a good one as well. So really depending on your lifestyle, your goals, and your family health history, working with a health professional, you can kind of tailor these down a little more specifically. But I've just tried to provide kind of a broad range of what people might want to look for if they're just looking to generally optimize their health and feel better on a day-to-day basis. Testosterone and free testosterone. We're going to look at that in conjunction with SHBG, which is a binding protein that can bind to your your testosterone and impact the amount of free testosterone you have. And then we're also going to look at estradiol because for men, that is cardioprotective and neuroprotective. A lot of people demonize estrogen, say it's a female hormone, but estradiol is actually good in terms of your long-term health.
Okay.
If you crash that, it can actually impact how your joints feel, your fat loss, a lot of things. So we're going to look at both. Testosterone obviously has a recent rise in discussion and popularity for a number of reasons, socially, politically, athletically, like really across the board. And it is a super important hormone. And we have seen decline in recent decades for a number of reasons. It's our environment, it's our lifestyle, and many Americans are metabolically unhealthy, which makes it very hard to have good hormonal health when you're, overweight, obese, and insulin resistant. So I would say, yes, we want to check that testosterone. Is there some variance day to day, week to week, and in seasons of your life? Yes. But generally speaking, if you go get your labs and you have a lower level and you make some corrective lifestyle adjustments and you go draw it again and it's still low and you confirm that with an additional blood sample or blood test, then it would be wise to consider, discussing your treatment options. Now, some people jump the gun, maybe they haven't been sleeping super well, or they're in a really intense phase of training, or if you're at the tail end of a diet, it's normal to see your testosterone decline when calories have come down. Calories are probably going to be highest in a maintenance phase or in a season where maybe you're not pushing your body quite as much, because in response to that stress, testosterone may have some transient decreases. Now, we're looking at both total testosterone and free testosterone, but that number by itself really shouldn't be your sole indicator in terms of your decision-making criteria. I always like to talk to guys about their sleep, their hunger, their recovery, their energy, their digestion, and their stress. If I see a guy who's experiencing high stress, terrible sleep, really low recoverability, energy levels in the trash, that's when we want to start that conversation, is when the biofeedback is kind of congruent with the blood work. If the biofeedback's great and you feel really good and your numbers in a physiological reference range, you may want to pump the brakes on just adding pharmaceuticals out of the gate, because there's probably some stuff you can do from a lifestyle perspective to optimize that. Now, depending on your age, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, what your goals are, certainly people can consider HRT or bioidentical hormone replacement therapy and adding that testosterone in. But really that should be done after having that blood test, talking about your lifestyle. Are we doing all of those kind of prerequisites? Because realistically, you should be doing those things even if you're on TRT. You should still be prioritizing your sleep. You should still be getting your training in. You should still be getting outside for walks. You should still be optimizing your nutrition. I'm a big believer in all of those things, whether you want to be on HRT or not. And so I think blood work kind of opens the door for the conversation, but we need to include lifestyle as well. And if you're concerned about your level, go back and test it again. Usually we want to be doing morning blood draws for testosterone. So when you go to get your fasted labs for your whole panel, it should have your testosterone and free testosterone on there. You're going to draw that. And then if need be, we can go back and repeat that and see if we're staying in that same range. A little bit of the variability that you're seeing that you referenced, that's normal. You're not going to have the same level like at every single moment of every single day. A lot of our hormones have what's called a diurnal rhythm, which means that they basically fluctuate as part of our biological clock. Don't freak out about that. That's totally okay. What I would be more concerned about is, let's say you try to make some adjustments. Maybe you're training 4 days a week, you're trying to get good sleep, manage your stress, you're improving your food quality, and you're eating enough calories, and you're not overweight or obese or anything like that, and you still report back with a subclinical testosterone value. That's when you really want to maybe start to have that treatment conversation. Obviously going to be up to you and your health provider if you want to do that, but those would be the red flags in my mind. Like, that's what I look for as kind of the recipe for success when it comes to testosterone. What we're talking about is the difference between like a Western range and a health optimization range, or Western range and what some people refer to as like a functional range. It all requires the context, right? Because if you could have that 500 or 600 testosterone level in total, but let's say your free is high or your percent free is high, and not all guys are going to aromatize their testosterone and estrogen at the same rate. So this is why you want a provider who's going to look at the full picture, or, understand your unique situation. Because if you have a guy who maybe he's in quote unquote normal range for total testosterone, but if he has lower free testosterone and he disproportionately aromatizes, which is just a science word that means convert. So it means it's a natural process in your body where a little enzyme comes along and converts testosterone and estrogen. So if you're converting a fair amount of that testosterone and estrogen, which can happen if you have higher body fat levels, you consume alcohol in excess, you have higher inflammation, micronutrient deficiencies, you may see a guy who's converting more of the testosterone and estrogen may also have lower free testosterone. For that person, correcting lifestyle, nutrition, and training can move them in the right direction, and also, moderating things like alcohol intake, et cetera, probably going to improve those testosterone levels, and would also lead to a more robust response should that individual decide to go on testosterone replacement. The problem that we're seeing when it comes to labs in that conversation and the question you asked is that reference range has kind of changed over time. So labs, based on the metabolic health of the population, the testosterone level has kind of moved with the state of the population or lack of health. So you do want to hold yourself to a slightly higher standard, but this is why it's so important to really think about how you feel. And if you are a younger guy, what I would do is, before you need it, before you feel bad, go get your labs done, because you want to know, okay, when I was at my optimal health or when I did feel my best, and this is where I believe more in an individualized approach. I could cite numbers and I could cite ranges, but what matters for you is, if you're the listener and you feel good right now, go get your labs because you want to benchmark. If you don't feel good, what you need to do is you go get your labs, and let's talk about your biofeedback, and let's talk about your quality of life. And then you're going to make adjustments there, because a good, functional medicine doctor or a good professional is going to really take how you're feeling into account and what your goals are, and have that conversation with you relative to the lab value. But to answer your question more on the range, what we're seeing is what's been acceptable or normalized is a progressively lower testosterone level, basically since the 1980s. And we see, guys now in their 20s and 30s that have levels that are comparable to guys when they're in their 50s, 60s, and beyond, just a number of decades ago. Actual indicators from an anatomical perspective, like male anatomical structure, and there's like the anogenital gap and things like that have been traced outside of lab values that are showing, the impact of change of total testosterone levels and our society, and even fertility markers, right? We're seeing changes in sperm morphology and motility. So this is definitely a bit of a men's health crisis where everyone should be checking that testosterone level. Before, the only options for guys were like injectable testosterone, which is still, a viable prescription option. I have nothing against that, but I think there's an increase in accessibility to lab work and different treatment options for men, which is important because guys need to be able to advocate for their health. And I'm a huge proponent of that. If you feel good and you have a lab value, don't let the lab value be like the monster in the closet or the monster under the bed that's like scaring you into feeling like crap. If you feel good, like, make note of that. Go get the test done, use it as a benchmark, and that's what you should strive to maintain. And then if over time you need to incorporate some treatment, like, no shame in that, right? Like, the goal is to preserve where you feel your best. And that's kind of my philosophy. If you need to go beyond that for performance reasons, or you personally feel your best slightly higher, like many of the companies that do things like lab work and testosterone therapy, they might shoot to have a guy above 700 or more in that 700 to 900, maybe even closer to 1,000 or maybe above that. But if someone feels good producing their testosterone naturally, it's also a conversation around male fertility and, are you trying to conceive? Are you still family planning? What age are you at? Because for a younger guy, if he's still considering having kids, it may be worthwhile holding off on that treatment for a little bit, unless you're going to be with a provider who understands how to maintain fertility using a combination of testosterone and peptides to keep that in place. The problem is a lot of people jump on just testosterone and they're in their 20s and they don't really understand the reproductive physiology and consequences of those things. So I'm just big on like make an informed decision that's best for you. Your health is not the same as my health and your family history is not the same as my family history. Your goals aren't the same as my goals. So my job is to educate, inform, and help you make a good choice for you. And if we can dial that in a little further, that's great. But really it's about having the tools to do that.